What's up, people? Recently, I made a build where I used the Spectral Blade to gain high amounts of shield. But what happens when you deck out the Spectral Blade for max crit instead? Well, the answer is the Butcher build. This will not only trivialize every dungeon in the game, but it also takes out bosses with ease. Enjoy hitting over 1000 crit on 8 enemies at a single time. Enjoy infinite stamina or more melee range than you could ever hope for. And enjoy free decoys to distract and make your life easy. This is probably the best invader build in the game, as well as the easiest one to use overall. I give you the Butcher build. For your Prime class, you want to select Invader. This class provides a lot for melee builds, as the Prime perk alone spawns decoys when you use a skill. Decoys last 3 seconds and grant you 15% more damage. Then you gain 35% more melee damage and 5% crit chance simply from playing the game. Running and evading specifically, which we'll be doing a lot of evading here. Gain some lifesteal if enemies are targeting a decoy, a much more lenient stamina cost on dodges, and relics create a decoy for 5 seconds. In general, you'll be using your decoys to gain more damage and distract opponents. If you get good at this style of combat, you can keep even bosses off of you for a large duration of the fight. For the skill, you want Wormhole. This teleports you behind an enemy, and the next attack you deal within 5 seconds has 300% more damage. Yep, you can get a massive increase in damage while evading attacks with just this skill. Also, since it has 2 charges, you can cut boss health down to near half at the start of the fight. Since Spectral Blade hits in a far range, you'll have a very easy time exploiting this bonus. For your subclass, you want Challenger, granting 35% more damage, 10% crit chance, damage reduction, reduced stamina cost, and relic usage, granting Bulwark. Both of these classes together grant excellent stamina reduction and defense while helping you deal thousands of damage at a time with melee. The skill you want to use is Juggernaut, as it provides 50% more melee damage and you gain more defense, which will come in handy through the dungeons. Of course, against bosses like Venom or Annihilation, defense really doesn't mean much unless you have a lot of it, but for most of the game, your survivability is pretty darn good. For armor, I found this really cool look that makes you feel like one of those executioner type guys. The strong, silent ones who usually do their master's bidding in a brutal, almost sick way. Bandit mask for the helmet and technician for the rest of the armor, which is going to keep us under the normal dodge weight and also offer enough armor to get hit here and there. I found this armor combo and said, yeah, that's pretty perfect for a Spectral Blade build where you're going to dice up everything on the screen. For our relic, we're going to be choosing the Quilted Heart. This one is pretty interesting as it works very differently from other sources of healing. Upon use, you gain a buff for 20 seconds. During this time, you have infinite stamina or no stamina drain whatsoever. And anytime you dodge, you heal. Because we'll be using the backstep attack on Spectral Blade repeatedly, this means you can heal over and over. And I don't think I need to tell you why infinite stamina is good for melee builds. Overall, it lets you wear more damage rings instead of stamina ones. For the relic fragments, you want melee crit chance, melee crit damage, and melee attack speed. This thing will crit easily and for loads of damage this way. I also value attack speed over anything else on melee weapons, as you can more freely use your attacks between boss moves. For your primary gun, you want the Bulldog. It's an extremely reliable primary that staggers easily, has a good amount of bullets per magazine, and is good support in general. We're going to throw on Boar, as it's the best mod to pair with melee. Shoot both boars out at an enemy and you can hit 2 weak spots at a time. Especially nice with Spectral Blade, as it has some absurd damage. I also ran with feedback since it helps regen boar a little faster. Of course, we're using the Spectral Blade as our melee option. This guy has one of the most OP attacks in Remnant 2, as you can use a backstep and then attack for this large swirling whirlwind. It attacks every enemy in its range and again hits boar easily. You can pair this with the resonance trait to basically have infinite range on the attacks, and with crit, it makes the game very easy. Attack through walls, fight bosses where they can't hit you, and finish off mobs with 0 effort. It's impossible to actually tell you how fun this weapon really is. With the Overdrive mutator, it will also crit every time you swing the weapon, letting you become a true butcher and chop up everything like a madman. Of course, the Corrupted Rune Pistol is never bad, as its mod increases damage, but I chose Nebula instead. Nebula is a much more fun gun and can apply Corrosion to grant your attacks 10% more damage. The mod Nanoswarm unleashes these bugs that attack relentlessly, and since we're running such high crit chance, their damage is top notch. Harmonizer as a mutator, as it seems fitting to increase the mod's damage and generate more mod power for Boar. For your amulet and rings, you want to basically improve the whirlwind attack as much as possible. Butcher's Fetish increases crit chance and damage for 15 seconds when using a charge attack. We'll only be using charge attacks and thus get an easy 25% boost to all crit damage. Probability Cord increases crit damage by 30%, which pretty much grants a 30% damage boost to all of your attacks. Akari Warband is perfect here as you gain 15% more crit chance and damage after dodging an attack, and since the backstep is a dodge, you can get this to work for you 90% of the time. Berserker's Crest increases melee charge speed so you can dodge a little better and get damage off faster. Braided Thorns increases crit chance by 15% for 10 seconds after killing an enemy. Not typically something I would run, but since we can effortlessly kill something across the room while still fighting a boss, you can get that to proc pretty much all the time. Now this setup felt perfect and somewhat unique for me as the crit chance is very high and the damage is insane. Be aware, however, that Boar is weak spot damage and you may run into issues with the Quilted Heart if bosses have empathy. So to counteract that, you can switch out the Braided Thorns for two different options. If bosses have empathy, the Bisected Ring is a must, so you don't keep healing the boss and eventually running out of relics altogether. Then if you need more damage instead, you can throw on Xania's Malice for a much higher weak spot. Venom for me had empathy, so I found that the Bisected was important near the end, and then Annihilation was throwing off my rhythm, so I used Xania's for much more damage. In general, the setup I have here is better for dungeons and most bosses, I think, but you have those two options as well. Of course, we do want some decent traits here, and since we'll be using melee, we want to support that primarily. 9 points into Fortify, as the other point is locked into Spirit, and this helps our survivability. Strong back, so you can wear this dope armor set. Triage, so the Quilted Relic actually heals you pretty well when you dodge. Untouchable, so it's easier to dodge attacks. Vigor for health, Endurance for stamina. Expertise, so the skills are very usable. Arcane Strike increases mod regen of melee attacks, which perfectly works with Boar. Fitness, so you can get away from bosses and get a better spot to start attacking. Glutton, so the Quilted Heart can provide us with its bonus easily. And lastly, of course, we want Resonance, as this is the trait that boosts the Whirlwind to attack everything on the screen. You've got the ability to dodge attacks with ease, gain benefits from melee and your relic without trouble, and survive a mess up here and there. As for the concoction, I ran with Dark Fluid. This increases the distance of evades and reduces the stamina cost of dodging. Since the Quilted Heart is what offers the infinite stamina, you might need support when it isn't active. This really improves your ability to move away from attacks and dodge more times than you would otherwise. In reality, you can also run several different concoctions like Mudtooth Tonic or Xenoplasm, but I thought this one worked best. Well, how exactly do you use this build? Pretty simple actually, but there is a good order to this. First and foremost, you want to use the Quilted Heart. This grants that infinite stamina for 20 seconds so you can really go ham for a bit. Use the Challenger skill anytime you have it to increase your melee speed and damage, then backstep attack repeatedly with the Spectral Blade to wipe the floor clean. Nebula's there to support you with extra damage in two different ways, and then Boar can be thrown out anytime to boost your damage by like 1,000 or 2,000 at a time. Lastly, we have the Wormhole ability, which is a very large damage boost. Use this after throwing out Boar for the best effect, or you can simply dodge attacks with it. The decoys give you plenty of time to set up attacks, and just be sure to eat a relic once the buff runs out. This build is crazy powerful with infinite stamina, very high crit numbers, and an attack range that really isn't fair. You should have an easy time defeating everything once you get more used to a melee-focused style of combat. And that's about it, everybody. This is the Butcher build, and I have to say it's one of my new favorite builds. This sword is not only elegant, but it's completely overpowered. Nice being able to attack bosses and deal with all their other mechanics at the same time. You could easily help friends out with this in co-op or just bully some bosses solo. As for the new King boss in the DLC, I beat him before he even phase transitioned, which is pretty freaking cool. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, a like down below would be fantastic. Go chop up some aliens, and I'll catch you next time.